Again? Why don't we go and look round the farm?
Farm, Hazel? What for? Cats and dogs.
I've got a little plan.
Won't it be dangerous?
Of course not.
Is it safe?
Of course.
Let's all go.
No. Just you and me.
Well, this is your chance to nail the line. Do you want to nail the line?
No. I'll freestyle.
Wait.
Hello there. Hi.
So, is war unforeseeable, Minister?
Look, all sorts of things that are actually very likely are also unforeseeable. For the plane in the fog, the mountain is unforeseeable, but then it is suddenly very real and inevitable.
Right.
Is this your opinion, or is this the government position?
The mountain in the metaphor is a completely hypothetical mountain that could represent anything.
So
Sorry,
who's
Minister,
the plane and who's the mountain?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that to walk the road of peace, sometimes we need to be ready to climb the mountain of conflict. Thank you so much.
Joined once again by Matt and Louis for a Pichy and Palscast. I gave Matt last night 2 options for what we could watch. Group A and Group B.
Didn't tell me what those options were, by the way.
So the A stood for Ayn Rand. The B stood for Britain. As a little note before I talk about what on earth I made you to watch, the bizarre connecting tissue between them is languages and the cultures that use the languages have this really weird symbiotic relationship where the way that you talk influences certain things about how you behave, and the way that you behave and changes in behavior further impact the way that language is developed and used. A feature of English, which is obviously the language we're speaking, to be precise, we're speaking Australian English, which does have some differences, both in form, spelling, and culture. That's 3 things, so both was a poor choice there. There are some differences between Australian English, American English, British English, Singaporean English. Lots of places that speak English, the culture does impact and alter things in certain ways, both in a grammatical sense and in a cultural usage sense. But something that is inherent to English as a language is it has a very heavy emphasis on individuality. The way that you indicate politeness. There's this thing in linguistics called politeness indicators, which is things that you do to be socially acceptable, I guess is a reasonable description. So in English, a form of politeness marker is things like please and thank you. Basically, the way that you be polite when speaking English is to acknowledge the person who you're speaking to's own individual agency. This isn't true across all languages. Another way that this is demonstrated in English is turn-taking. As you might notice, I am speaking, and my 2 guests here, Louis and Matt, are not speaking. This is a thing that you do to be polite when speaking English. This is not true of all languages. If we were speaking Japanese, what you 2 would be doing right now is going, hi, so desu ka, so desu ne, so naruhodo.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Because the correct way to be polite there is to demonstrate you are listening by giving affirmative responses. If we were speaking Italian, there is no turn-taking. People are expected to just speak when it comes to their mind. As some further examples of politeness indicators, in Spanish, the correct way to be polite is to be direct. The blunter you are when you give feedback in Spanish, the more polite you are being. Because there, the attribute that's being expected is honesty. And that you respect people by proving that you can trust them to hear your honest opinion. In, say, Persian, the way that you be honest is how can I put this? You bring yourself down almost. You attribute everything positive that has been said about you and attribute it to the person who was giving that praise. So someone says, hey, I really like that book you wrote. You say, no, it's because of the things you taught me. I knew nothing. So, the idea that I had for this was when I last watched Watership Down, which is the first of the 2 films we watched. And one of the things that's very unique to English, like British English, is the way that it conveys individuality in comparison to American and Australian English. In American English, there is a certain level of acceptance for asserting your individuality through certain emotions. In particular, aggression and anger are very much accepted as being part of the correct, polite individuality of American English. In Australian English, you're generally more demonstrating your individuality through irony, certain level of self-deprecation. In British English, it's much more built around this stiff upper lip. That the more stoic you are, and the least emotion that you show, the better you are. And, well, I mean, like, the more correct that you're being. And Watership Down is a film that really, it's so British. And I think that this is a key to why it feels so English, is that even when there is a maniacal military dictator oppressing his people, he still spends the time to, have a chat with the enemy general, that's all very good. What ho? And likewise, the second film we watched in the loop has some very strong contrasts of people not from the United Kingdom, but not specifically England, and how differently they assert their individuality, and the emotional range that characters like Malcolm Tucker and Jamie feature. So that was my inspiration here, to start us off, just an attempt at looking at how British film reflects the idea of stoicism.
Okay.
So now we can talk about the movies however we want. That was my connective tissue.
Sure.
Interesting. Well, we started with Watership Down,
Yes, we did.
which I've never seen. I've only ever heard of it being that thing that frightened children many years ago because
There's dead rabbits.
dying dead rabbits, and the blood on the hills thing.
That sequence is delightful.
Yeah, I never heard of Watership Down before.
Yep.
This is my first.
Yep, so this is a
introduction to
film. Yeah, this is a film where, certainly in very English circles, and some Australian circles, depending on what your contact with film is, this was a film that was kind of known in public consciousness. It then, in the mid-late 2000s, it's had a bit of a resurgence in online film discourse for fans of animation, and basically people who came into film because of TV tropes. Because it's quite often used there with the way that TV tropes propagates mimetic discussion. It frequently comes up as, man, it's that thing that you show your children to make them scared. Because, well, man, look at these dead rabbits. I'll be blunt here. I am an Australian who has a background in farming. Nothing fills me with more glee than seeing dead, horribly mutilated rabbits. They are a blight on the landscape, and I take a great, horrifying to most perverse pleasure in seeing them be tortured. My only problem is that since it's set in England, they can't catch Khaleesi virus.
Yeah, I was gonna say, particularly in Australia with rabbits. One of the biggest pests. I was always under the impression that Watership Down, there was going to be more to the thematic content, only because it's animated, British, and has anthropomorphized animals. So I, for some reason, associated it with Animal Farm. But it's an adventure movie.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like I guess you'd call it a children's animated movie, but there are elements of it that I just go so far against that it's tough to kind of like nail down exactly who it's for.
Oh, the intent in both the author was saying when he wrote the original book, he was all about, in interviews many years later, that this is just a story that I told my children. This is a story that I made up. I guess the Tolkienian approach of I want to create some new lore and fairy tales for a new generation.
So this is Shyamalan's Later in the Water.
I can definitely the idea that it just kind of happened in a improvisational kind of manner. I was like, I just made this story to tell some kids that, because of the way it's structured, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as we really get into the film, but just the way the movie works, how it moves from scene to scene and like topic to topic, it feels like something that just someone is just like, oh, and then this happened, and then this happened, And then the next thing happened.
It feels a lot like serialized writing.
Yeah.
And we'll see this, I think, the best, of course, the greatest modern film example is the 50 Shades of Grey movies.
Okay.
But when you're writing serial literary fiction, it is very easy for chapters to feel really far more disjointed than if you're writing the novel straight. This was actually just a straight written novel, but certainly in film form, it really just is this series of events that are vaguely connected by a theme.
That they're rabbits.
There's rabbits and they do some things, and it does essentially work in two halves, where it's the quest to find a place to live, and then a way to... I guess you could describe it as a way to assert your own individual strength as a Warren. But it's basically, first off is finding a place to live, and then the second half is liberating some other oppressed rabbits, is the structure of the film.
Finding a mate.
Yeah, when you look at it from that angle, like just trying to break it down in that way, it does make it sound more concise and coherent than I think it was.
Yes.
Like you can look back on it and say, oh yeah, that's probably the two halves of it, but the way that it does those two halves and the little asides that it has during those, and
Yeah, it's a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there's the crossing of the road with the vroom vrooms, and then there's
The
rats.
Roodadoos.
It's the Roodadoos, that's it. And then there's the rats, and the cat, just all sorts of random stuff that just sort of pops up.
Mild annoyances along the way, but not so much the proper ideal hero's journey. These have thematic purposes for personal growth that we have come to expect in modern storytelling.
And I'd say a lot of those asides came in the first half of the movie.
Yes.
During the journey part, maybe we should just say what this like. We're just talking about journeys and second halves. Basically, like the general plot is there's a bunch of rabbits that live in a warren, which apparently is like a community of some kind.
Yes.
Yes.
That is the word that we use when discussing rabbit homes.
Sure. So there's a rabbit community where there is a rabbit called Fiver and a rabbit named Hazel.
Yep.
And these
Played by John Hurt.
played by John Hurt.
The first of two Doctor Who actors that we saw today.
Yeah, I didn't know what you meant when you first said that in Watership Down, but then I noticed him.
Then you saw the best actor Doctor to get the worst scripts.
Yes, that's very funny. But yeah, there's a rabbit named Fiver and a rabbit named Hazel, who are both friends, and Fiver seems to get these visions or premonitions. It's a weird part of the film actually, because it's normally like there's not that many supernatural elements in the film except for Fiver.
Yeah, there's also not a lot of resistance at the start to his premonitions. He's just sort of like, bad things are gonna happen, let's go. And all the
And everyone goes, okay.
And that's how that journey happens.
It's
That's what we're
also
talking about.
somewhat sloppy visual storytelling because what triggers the vision is he sees a sign advertising development in the area.
I
But
didn't pick up on that.
but here's the problem with the way that they visually convey this. He only sees the back of the sign. And the way it's framed, it almost looks like a gallows, which is cool, but having a slightly less ambiguous depiction of here is the sign advertising development, because they reaffirm it once they've left that region, that here is the sign was telling you about development, but they made it too ambiguous to begin with, so to an audience trying to interpret the visuals and circumstances, you get a bit more confusion than you should be. As to how does his argument stack up?
Yeah, there's a few of those, like poor communicating of ideas, and then I mean our discussion of what friggin' Warren are we dealing with right now? Which one is what? Who are the bad guys?
Yeah, for such a at least seemingly at first straightforward story, and probably ultimately a pretty straightforward story, that's gonna be like a running theme, like just confusion over like little logical things and just confusion what exactly
The core is it's structural editing issues.
Yeah.
But there's just scenes placed in ways that make things more confusing than they need to be. Also, just some sloppy moments of editing. There's a bit where it starts fading to black while someone's still speaking. That always sticks out every time I watch it.
Yeah.
It's a sloppily put together film. And with that Fiver, with his prediction of this oncoming doom, I thought that was actually weirdly done. Where like the start of it made I've seen in a lot of films, a lot of stories. You have this.
Windows is windowsing me.
Yes.
We should be okay. I hope we're okay.
Yes, hope is all we can really do. But yeah, like it starts off how you'd expect. You have someone with a prediction or a premonition of doom. You know, how no one really wants to believe Fiver at first, and he goes to the chief rabbit, and the chief rabbit ignores him.
Just piss off, you bloody kid.
Yeah, but then in the very next scene,
everyone just agrees.
Yeah, everyone.
Well,
or maybe not everyone, but a large.
A
group
sufficient
does.
contingent agrees.
Yeah, even though we've seen.
It's actually larger in the book.
Oh, is that so?
Yes.
Well, maybe the book did it better. I don't know. In the
It
movie, it doesn't. Okay. Well, okay. So basically, like, we see no one believe Fiver. Hazel's like his friend, so he kind of like pays attention. But then, and then we go to the chief, and he says no. He says piss off, as you say. And then the very, very next scene
is them just leaving.
Just leaving. They have like some lines about what was it? Yeah, don't like the look of things, which is also just insanely British. But it's just like, of what things? What are you looking at?
Maybe they're scared of the Germans that come later.
Yes, maybe. But either way, it's strangely done, and it doesn't matter that much. But it's just another example of just a little bit sloppy.
And it's sloppy, and Fiver, like, there is a spiritual element throughout the book and the film, which is this. It's an interesting thing that we could unpack all day. That there is a certain strand of confusion about British spiritual identity, which leads to weird attempts at trying to reconnect with Celtic and British paganism, which there's a little bit of here, while it also being a somewhat Abrahamic monotheistic religion. Very wonky stuff, the religion of the rabbits, that appears throughout the film. I think the biggest thing is they have a really nice choice of artistic style when the film actually opens with a dreaming. Just, here is a folk oral tradition of the rabbits and their religion. And then the rest of the film is done in a straight realist style, where everything is photorealistic and the events are very, very starkly photorealistic as much as they can be. And even the personification of the rabbits is kept to a minimum. Most of their motions are trying to be as accurate to actual rabbits as possible. The way that they move around, there's some really nice cuts when they're actually running away from predators, where they do the things that rabbits actually do. As well as points where they just start like scratching their ears with their back foot in idle conversation, things like that.
Thumping the ground to get people's attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of like nice little details.
Yeah.
I mean, the watercolor backgrounds and all that.
Yeah, like, that's all great, but it doesn't work when you're trying to convey a spiritual identity at the same time.
Yeah.
And so the times where it gets a bit more abstract, on multiple viewings, I feel that they're actually some of the strongest visual moments in the film. Then it feels like there's being that little bit more stylized allows the brain to suspend your disbelief a bit more, that there is some degree of spiritual involvement in the narrative here.
Yeah, I did like the opening segment, which had that interesting art style that I really enjoyed. I felt it later on, just because the movie had it'd been so long, and since it had last done something like that.
Yeah.
That meant that even though the visuals might have been good, they just felt so out of place at that point. As well as, this is a lot further into the film, so I'm not going to talk about too much, but like...
Well, we don't need to go through the narrative step by step.
That's true, yeah. Okay, Hazel is injured by some shotgun pellets, and there is a very long visual sequence, which...
Yeah, it was
it doubles as... Yeah,
a lot of things happen, because it's like, he gets shot and runs into some undergrowth, and then the humans show up. But then Pfeiffer's back somewhere else is like hanging out, and someone tells him that Hazel's been shot, and he's like, "Oh, I'd better go and run down there." And then Hazel's just hanging out.
A music video happens.
Yeah,
that's right.
It can't decide if it's a spiritual close encounter with death for Hazel, or if it's another premonition for Fiver. You get an Art Garfunkel song, I guess.
It's one of the most.
But again,
confusing.
this is in general the problem with the way it handles spirituality, is that it's so distant from the rest of the narrative and the art that whenever it appears, it seems intrusive in a way that doesn't help the narrative.
Yeah, it felt really disjointed.
No one's gonna like me saying this, but it reminded me a little bit of Snowpiercer. In that it's like a really, like, it's, like I say, really realistic, but it's mostly this gritty nasty kind of film. There's no one has like superpowers or anything like that. It's just this story about people trapped on a train. But this one girl has, I just forget exactly what her superpower was, but it was like
she can see through doors.
See through doors or something like that.
Or she can feel through doors.
Yeah, it was.
She was always like, nah, there's like 5 guys through that door. Be careful.
So you have this one person in an otherwise very down to earth, gritty kind of story. Or in this is not gritty, but it's one person with supernatural abilities that no one really talks about that much.
Like Tom Hardy in Dunkirk.
Like Tom Hardy and Dunkirk.
That's just because he's the best pilot ever.
Yes, because that's just Tom Hardy. That's not supernatural. That's
Tom Hardy traveled through time to fly that Spitfire.
Are we suggesting that Tom Hardy is actually the same character in every film that he's in?
Oh, maybe he is.
They are all the one continuity.
But it is weird. Fiverr is a weird character, and the spirituality. His ability is weird. The spirituality is weird in this movie. I would say that.
Yeah, and I mentioned before that in interviews, the original author just says, "Well, I wasn't thinking that hard about the spiritual elements of the original text."
Yeah,
and that's what leads to that sort of attitude. You know, like I guess we can have some sort of ideas like this. But keeping it in the bag like that ultimately hurts the narrative and your understanding of these characters.
Yeah. And I would say that that's actually probably a theme, like a pattern in the whole film. That there's a lot of stuff that could be really interesting. Spiritual stuff could be pretty interesting. How the communities work of the rabbits could be interesting. There's a lot of stuff that's just kind of thrown out there. And I don't think it's fleshed out enough.
Yep.
To be honest, it's a very stop-start kind of story, and nothing is really explored.
A lot of the ideas in this film are things that you could make an entire film about.
Yeah.
Had they chosen just like one,
but instead it just reads off like a list of bullet point adventure ideas.
Someone could make a TV show out of this. It could be very successful.
From memory, there was.
Oh, okay.
I need to check that up. I need to read up the rest of the Watership Down lore.
The cinematic universe.
Oh no! Don't let someone hear that.
I would love to talk about something that could have been really good and was interesting in a surface level and was interesting what was happening, but then wasn't really fleshed out. One of the scenes that I really enjoyed was on their journey. They go through a few trials and eventually they get to another warren.
Yes. This is perhaps the most famous part of the film.
Oh, okay.
Is this one because of... I mean, you can talk about it.
Oh, okay. So basically, they find another warren. They find another rabbit who's just by himself, and he's weirdly drawn compared to the others. Like, there's like 3 different groups of rabbits basically in this story.
Oh, this he's very clearly unhealthy.
Yes.
He's got a twitch. He's got a broken arm. That's just hanging. Whoa there. Why do we bash... I'm going to break down Matt's apartment while I'm talking here. He's got a broken arm. It's okay, that'll be fixed in post.
Sure.
Broken arm, droopy eyes, bit of a twitch. He's clearly unhealthy and not of sound mind.
Yeah, but he does invite them back to his warren, where he apparently has more friends. And he does, eventually, we see like a small group.
Yeah, there is a community in that.
A very small one. And it's just... There's a genuinely creepy vibe throughout the entire little sequence. And it's actually pretty small compared to the size of the film. They go in there and they're given
food.
They're given food. That is... Like, you're so certain that it's poison. It's...
One of them
we know it's not.
Loud. It's not poison.
It's not poison.
Yeah,
Someone
it's wonderfully
said...
80-yard in line.
Yes.
No focal point for who's actually saying it. No, I guess it's not poisoned.
Good thing it's not.
But there's like a genuine mystery of like, is there, like, at first you're wondering, is he alone? You turn out there's a small group of them, but you wonder why it's such a sparsely populated warren. You wonder what's going on with these rabbits. Why are they sick? You know, do they have... They seem to have an ulterior motive. You have Fiverr, who is like begging them to get out of that warren the same way he was begging them to get out of the previous one. It's just all these like little elements and as well as the visuals. It's just like I felt genuine tension through that sequence.
Absolutely.
And it's just such a shame that eventually,
It's so quickly resolved.
it's so quickly resolved.
Nothing happens.
Yeah, basically, nothing ends up happening except Bigwig, who is one of the a part
Our
of the
baby
group.
face muscle.
Yes, he's probably the biggest and the strongest rabbit of them all, and he is
Which is a point in towards the end of the film.
sure.
That the ultimate main villain of the film assumes that he is the leader, when ultimately it is the one who is the smartest and craftiest that is the
Yes.
actual leader.
The one you can't trust.
The one you can't trust.
Frickin' John Hurt, man.
But yeah, just it finishes off. He gets snared, and they release him. They realize that the entire Warren and the surrounding area has been just covered in traps, and they decide, well, this is a bad place then. And they leave.
And that's like, yeah.
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
go. And we never see them
You
again.
never see them again. It's such a shame. That could have been a great sequence. There was so many interesting possibilities they could have gone
Yeah.
from there, and they just leave. And that's a shame. It was my favorite part of the whole movie.
But you do get that sweet sequence of Bigwig getting choked by a wire. Oh yeah. Look at that photorealistic blood. Look at that strangling. Yeah.
That's when it stops being a children's film, just randomly.
And even better because they start doing death rites.
Yeah, they uncomfortably lean into it for a while until they just give up and they're just like, here's a whole lot of rabbit murder.
Can I ask why they couldn't just take it out? Like, well, what was it? Something wrapped around his?
It's a wire snare trap.
Wire snare trap.
So that's basically you set it off and a wire snaps around your neck.
Sure.
And so you need to actually relieve the peg that's holding down the wire to get enough to relieve the tension enough that you can then pull it off.
Okay. And why couldn't they? They seem to have a lot of trouble doing that. Like they didn't all do it at once. They would just get one rabbit to do it one at a time.
Yeah, it seemed like they were trying to build tension for something.
They're building tension. There was a remark that it's the wood splintering a lot, so they're having a bit of trouble finding the way to actually dig at the core part of the peg.
Yeah, sure.
Mostly it's the flurry around because you're a bit panicky and build some tension that way.
Yeah.
Which is good, but then unfortunately, once he was saved, they just ran off, and
It's like, well,
it was
yeah.
time to start a new
You're like,
sequence.
yes, that's taken care of.
Yeah, it's a real shame.
Cheerio, pip pip bloods.
What happens after that?
After
They
that,
pretty much just get to their little paradise, right?
Yep.
Don't they? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh no! And then there's the random aside of John Hurt, who at night is just like, "Hey, let's go and
hey,
go on,
it's May. I want to get laid.
yeah." He's just like, "Hey, Dandelion, come with me. We're going to that farm over there." All right, then, John Hurt.
Yeah, it probably one of the biggest things I took from this movie is that John Hurt is utterly untrustworthy and unconvincing. Makes it sound like he's a bad actor. That's obviously not the case. But he's just, you don't buy him as a hero at
It's
all.
that tendency that British actors tend to have where no matter how earnest they're being, just the flat resting tone that you take as a British person gives you this certain air of superiority and untrustworthiness, which is even exacerbated somewhat by the way that he exploits foreign labor in this film.
Yeah, a lot of that.
Here's this dumb German. Let's
Dumb
see how
German
much
bird.
free stuff we can get out of this German
Yeah.
bird. I can't remember the actor's name. He was an American actor. I think he had some German heritage because he was in inquiries for the House of Un-American Committee. Everyone's favorite American xenophobia committee of that period. And this was the last thing he did before he died. He was a...
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Wow.
This is our Orson Welles in Transformers for today.
Well, it wasn't like he did a bad job. It was a pretty funny character, actually, the bird. Like, at times he was annoying just because of the way his dialogue worked, but I did laugh a lot at a lot of the stuff.
Yeah, he has enough genuinely amusing character moments that you can get over the fact that this is a really, really lazy stereotype of a dumb, arrogant foreigner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When this is the core of British colonialism, is that Britain was the dumb, obnoxious, self-important foreigners
Yeah.
jumping around.
But yeah, it's not just abusing the trust or exploiting foreign labor from a German bird. Like I would say almost half of John Hurt's lines sound vaguely ominous or building up to some sense of betrayal. Louis
I'll get you out of the way of the cat.
Yes, that I
Stand near me and run when I do.
people who maybe have watched this film before might think it's how ludicrous that I genuinely thought this. Like, I wasn't thinking this was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny? I absolutely 100% believed. There's a scene, Louis just started talking about it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, the one where John Hurt wants to get laid.
Yeah, the one where John Hurt wants to get laid.
They go into a barn and they try to...
Mike, closer, Louis.
Oh. They go into a barn and they try to convince some like rabbits to leave with them. And a cat shows up.
Yeah, and well, like even at the start of that scene where he's just saying, "I have an idea." He's just gone to one of the random rabbits. I don't know if they had a name.
They haven't even established that there are some rabbits kept in a hutch.
Yeah,
and that they're all women in the farm. Yeah. John Hurt's just, a farm? I know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah,
it'll be nice if we knew John Hurt.
Yes, and then he's like, and we know this can't be true at all because the rabbit asked him whether it'd be dangerous. And he's like, of course not. And
it's not gonna be dangerous.
It's like, and we know it that we don't know what his plan is, but we know that's untrue. We know that there are dogs and cats around.
It's a farm
hammered into us like from the start of the film, and so yeah, he's gone up to these does and he's connected with them, but then they have to escape because they're afraid they're gonna get caught. And there's a cat outside. That is very dangerous. It's
a cat, it's inherently dangerous.
Inherently dangerous, and the other rabbit is freaking out. He's like, "Oh my god, we're gonna do this! A cat is gonna kill us!" He's just like, "It's okay, I'll handle this." And
just stick with me. We'll get through. Honest. Wait for my signal.
I was certain he was gonna throw that rabbit to that cat. I was so certain,
especially since we've already had things throughout the film like. By that point, like the snare trap and the almighty death by montage.
Yes.
Yeah.
This film doesn't pull punches when things get maimed and killed, except for when it does.
That hawk.
Yes. Yeah. So
with the
only doe that the rabbits have with them to begin with just strays a little bit out from the group during broad daylight, and a hawk immediately swoops it and kills her. But they do this entirely through montage. It's just shot of hawk. Shot of rabbit, shot of hawk, shot to where the rabbit was, and you just see some little strips of fur. It's just cool, but you've already established that you're totally willing to be horrifyingly violent, so why not show that hawk murder some rabbits? That'd be cool. I like hawks.
Yeah, I understand the desire to see more rabbit blood, but I don't know. I thought it was pretty well done.
It is good filmmaking.
Yeah, it looked good, and I think the fact it was so fast, I think, was the point. Like, they straight out and in a blink.
Just anyone can die instantly. Like, this is the life of rabbits. Yeah. Like, you are prey.
Yeah. Like, there wasn't as much point to drag that out with blood and guts and gore as there was in other scenes.
The fights.
Yeah.
Or the wonderful gassing scene.
Oh.
That was horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was again, like, I think the way I put it in my notes is, like, even it's this weird thing where it's one step away from being like full-blown horror, but when it's not making that step, it's still a children's adventure story.
Yep.
Like, that's a weird position to be in. It must have very long legs because it's able to step very far from children's story to horror.
I can absolutely see why like kids who saw this were like, what the hell is this movie?
Yeah.
And there's the old Don Bluth quote. I can't remember the exact words, but his attitude was always, kids will accept anything if there's a happy ending.
Yeah.
Which is an odd thing to say about this one, because not only is it before Don Bluth's debut as a director, but also it ends with the main character dying. Though, to be fair, it's of old age after making many... Yes, he was old.
He was old.
They showed he had lots and lots and lots of small children. They were talking about how Hazel had fathered like 1,000 rabbits.
Wow.
And
like,
he was old and wrinkly.
I didn't get that.
Yeah.
I thought it was because, like...
The Black Rabbit of Death?
I was really confused.
He's had a long and fulfilling life. He's had a long and fulfilled life. It's winter to indicate the change of the old guard. And then just... The Grim Reaper for rabbits pops up and goes, hey, it's time. You down with this? And Hazel goes, yep. Cool.
Alright, that might have been my fault, but...
It's always your fault, man.
It's always my fault, yeah. I just felt it was just so sudden. And I think that's why, like, you can say that you can show time passing very quickly with certain visuals, but to me it just felt so sudden. And because... I think another thing that confused was because of that very strange scene when Hazel was shot, and there was
it was so overblown.
Yeah, I was convinced. I was so surprised when Hazel turned out to be fine. And so when this was happening, instead of thinking about him being old, I thought did he make like did like the rabbit god of death like make like a pact with him? And he's like, okay, you've got your people safely home. Now I'll take you.
He does do the Conan the Barbarian, like, pray to my god.
Yeah.
Come if you're out there.
I was like, oh yeah, because I was like, first
and
it felt like he made a pact with some kind of
he was
spiritual being,
well,
and
he
now
was
that
trying
he's
to do that with Frith, their god, the sun.
Yeah, well, the point is, he tries to.
and then it
but-
fails.
Well, it's not that he fails. It's that God explicitly says, nah, you're on your own. That's not how I work.
Yeah,
so
it's like, whatever
it's a
happens,
deterministic
happens.
faith.
Yeah. It's that, like, soft determinism of stoicism where it's like, it doesn't actually matter whether I know whether something will or won't happen, whether it is actually chaos. From my perspective...
Just matters, it happens, so therefore
what
it
matters,
is.
it happens, and it's like, it's completely out of my hands.
Yep.
Like, it falls into that stoicism
Yep.
that you were kind of talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
Yeah.
That is fine.
Yeah, what
Where
else?
were we? Yeah.
We were just talking
And
about
the-
Hazel time.
We can talk about women and how they're all trophy prizes in this, which was a criticism of this film in 1978.
Wow.
And still holds up to this day, because all the women are prizes in this. It's pretty shit.
Yeah.
There's one that's shown to at least be resourceful and brave.
Yeah,
at the
that's
very
more
least.
that's more than the book has.
Oh, that's nice. It's a shame to make something like that a plot point. Like that's a very like when you get to the first half is over and they find their promised land, they're like, oh well, we need women. So that's like an actual like plot point.
That is an explicitly stated goal
Yes.
for the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's not much you can really do with that.
And is ultimately the motivation behind helping another Warren that's being oppressed by a brutal military dictator.
Yeah, which also even without the sexism kind of part, like I really didn't like that part of the film. I feel like that's when the film really started to fall off for me, when it just brought up this entirely new plot line of now
It's
we
something
have,
that you would build a sequel around.
yeah, it felt like this is now Watership Down 2, and
And the first one hasn't finished.
yes, it just wasn't it wasn't as interesting to me as the journey there. I thought, like, even though they weren't fleshed out enough, the asides were pretty fun. We skipped over a part where they had a fight with some rats in a barn owl, which I thought was fun while it lasted. It was only about 10-20 seconds.
Yeah. Well, it's also, throughout that half of the film, it's discussing the wide variety of threats that rabbits can have.
Sure.
Whereas the second half is about the internal politicking of rabbits.
Yeah, a true case.
And I'm all for being a politics nerd. This may be obvious by the second film I made you watch.
Sure.
But it's not the right time or place.
No.
And there's like a feud between the leader of that Warren, the general, they call him, and Bigwig. I like it. It's not a well told film. Like there's like a
That's the core of Watership Down.
yeah. Like Bigwig infiltrates the Warren, which I must have zoned out a little bit because I was just sort of
His
happened.
infiltrating involved walking up and saying, hey, can
Yeah.
I join you? And they're like, well, what can you do? He's like, I can dig.
And I can fight.
And he becomes
Well, that seems alright
Okay.
then. Here's some bitches.
yeah, and he becomes a general. Like a general, he becomes like a bigwig. Bigwig becomes a bigwig very, very quickly in that Warren out of nowhere, and then he betrays them, of course, because he's trying to get the does.
Get the chicks.
He's trying to.
Need chicks lay eggs.
And then the
Sit
general
on eggs.
And then the general just loses it, and he's like, "I'm gonna kill Bigwig. I've been betrayed."
I'm gonna murder everybody.
Yeah, and then it just feels like because there's been no build up to it, so we're supposed.
Well, I
to...
mean, in that case, that's kind of okay because he's a heel.
yeah,
Like the point is just that he's an egotistical asshole. So.
sure. Well, that's the point, but it still means that like, if you're gonna have that kind of a feud going on between one of the protagonists and a villain, you would hope that means more than it does in Watership Down. I would say, like, it's not like there's like a moment when they're like about to fight each other, and it's like, I'm gonna kill you, Bigwig, for betraying me, and he's like, I hate you, slave driver man, and it's like,
General Woodward.
There's no real emotion in the scene because we haven't had
Yeah.
time to build it up.
Just sort of tagging him with, this is the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, not enough breathing room for the villain to be really hated extensively.
Yeah.
Like, you go, yeah, that's a bad guy and I don't like him. But you're not begging to see him get bopped.
Yeah. And there was never going to be any amount of time for it because, like, you couldn't extend this film by another 20, 30 minutes to build up some kind of like, emotional connection to the evil Warren and the evil Jenna and all that. It was already too long to me. So, yeah. The second half of the film definitely was worse than the first, I think is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yep. Yeah. I certainly agree as well.
I don't know how long this movie would have been if it ended when they got to their promised land or promised Warren.
About 50 minutes.
About 50 minutes. I mean, I guess if you extended the scene in the
there's enough content there that you could have absolutely made an 80-minute film of just getting to the hill.
Yeah.
And I would have rather that movie, I think, yeah.
An authentic hero's journey.
Or at least just a fun story about an adventure to a no promised land.
I guess I do have a question because it's something you brought up when you mentioned. I can't remember exactly the moment, but you said comparing reality to fiction and the way that this movie has a lot of random stuff that just sort of happens, which is more or less like life, but for a movie and entertainment.
I know where it was.
Yeah, it's
early on in the film, they need to cross a small stream.
That's right. Yeah.
And they work out that they can float across the stream by using some planks of wood. And then one of the characters says, "That'll be useful. That'll be good to remember in future situations."
Like really hard foreshadowing.
Yeah.
I guess like what my question is like what is inherently about that sort of like random stuff that comes across as contrived or like,
well, in this case, it's the plot coincidences are perfectly fine. You are using situational awareness to construct a solution.
yeah.
The key is the lines of, "That is useful, we should pay attention to that." You're calling attention to the man behind the curtain. It's a brief little moment where your brain is remembering you are watching a work of fiction.
Yeah.
And then, because when you are engaging in partaking in stories, you want to be taken along for the ride and feel like you're there with them, watching this thing and rooting for and feeling what the characters are feeling.
Yeah.
And so when you have little moments like that, then you're reminded that you're watching fiction. And even when it's a cartoon movie from 1978 about rabbits, it still makes it feel less real.
Yeah, so I guess it removes that veneer of the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, it's just just enough cognitive dissonance.
I guess then, like, my other question, is then, like, what is inherently wrong with, like, those sorts of random moments that just sort of happen as well, though? Because it's like, I know that when I see, like, when I'm watching a movie and I guess my criticism would be this movie is not concise. We're being shown pointless things. What is inherently wrong with doing something that is like reality, which is just sort of, life just sort of happens?
It is very much, partly it's a product of being creatures who have been consuming visual media for so long that we know what the rules are. Oftentimes you can't vocalize what the rules of visual storytelling are, but your brain has picked them up.
Yeah.
And this is an integral part of norms and violating norms, is that norms that are called norms because they're normal and you don't see them, they're invisible. And it's only when you violate norms that you actually can work out what the norms are.
Right, yeah.
And so, when you are presenting a story, this is where tone comes in. If you're establishing this is a story with set goals and motivations, then that is what your audience is going to be wanting to see. Things that advance that and build inform characters in pursuit of their goal. If you establish that your film right from the get-go is a meandering series of vignettes, then your audience will go, okay, this is about a series of vignettes, so when I see more vignettes, I'll just take them for what they are.
So it's all about, I guess, like the cultural, what we're used to, and as well as the signaling that
Yeah,
the
it's
media kind
all
of...
about the signaling.
Right. Okay.
The
Interesting.
signaling and the tone.
Thank you.
And yeah, the irony, of course, is that in real life, if someone had said, "Hey, we should remember this trick that we did," you'd be like, "Yes,
Yes.
we should."
Yeah, probably.
I play fighting games, and like giving tips like that all the time is a thing that is very useful for community growth.
Yeah.
But in film, it's pulling that back the curtain just that little bit. This is why fourth wall breaks are very tricky science and art, and you can't just throw them about willy-nilly, because then you go, well, what's the point in watching this if it's just fiction and not real, and there's nothing actually at stake?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you recommend this
Would you
film?
recommend? I would not. I think that the start of it was promising, and there was some stuff that I liked, but ultimately I just don't think it's a well-told film, and I don't think it really... And I just can't see what it would really give someone. Like, if they haven't watched this movie before, like, would they think, why would I watch this film? Why wouldn't I?
I think this is one where I feel it's most valuable to people studying the craft of film.
Sure.
Because it's a good example of the little things that can come along in your execution that make for a less effective story.
Sure. I would not... I would not recommend it for just casual viewing. If you have a more professional reason, then sure.
Watch Allegra non Troppo instead.
Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely like material, like potential, like good stuff in there, but it's definitely mired by confusing pace and like miscommunication of what's going on.
It'd be a great children's serial, like a little either TV show or maybe like a comic book or something like that, like just like little stories.
Or a book. Perhaps a novel.
I would not read the novel. Watership Down.
Instead, we will recommend The Animals of Farthingwood.
Oh boy, that is a show with some sloppy animation.
Yeah.
Because it's a low-budget British animation project from about 92. Animals of Farthingwood, pretty good though.
Okay.
Have you ever seen that show?
I have not.
Oh boy.
A more horrific road sequence.
Yeah, it has a somewhat famous episode where they have to cross a highway in peak hour.
And yeah.
And, you know, children's serial where characters die. That's always handy.
That's what we want, really. That's
what we
it's
want.
gold dust, unicorns.
But Gold Dust works for the WWE.
Oh boy.
I'm
Every
sorry.
time.
I'm sorry, that was horribly uncalled for, Matt. I can't believe that you brought up Dustin Runnels.
Yeah, this is
Matt's got his head in his hands now. He realizes the shame, what he has done to us. Bringing that conversation down. Speaking of masculine fury and power, we watched In the Loop.
Okay.
Man,
Now, neither of you have seen any Armando Iannucci stuff before, have you?
I don't, probably not, no.
Yeah,
Who is that?
the director of this film. He also directed the TV show The Thick of It and the TV show Veep.
Oh, that's the American, like...
It's the
sort of
American The Thick of
adaptation?
It.
Yeah.
Yes, he was asked to work on an American adaptation, and so he wrote something appropriate for an American audience and American politics at the time of writing.
I've heard good things
Yep.
about it.
Yeah, one of the plaudits.
Yep. The Thick of It is primarily interested in the relationship between politicians and the media, specifically Britain, but a lot of it can be applied to just Western democracies in general. It's very much looking at the terrible reciprocal relationship that politics and the media have, where bad petty decisions by politicians to stay in power and to get positive approval get torn apart by the media in such a way that there's no correct answer for the politicians. They can't actually get anything done correctly in the first place, so very much a bad guys and bad guys relationship that politics and the media have developed. It was developed at around the start of what is known as the 24-hour news cycle, and that's only accelerated since. Almost every episode of The Thick of It has wound up predicting a situation that happened in American, British, or Australian politics at some point. This even includes things like an episode where a lot of it is built around someone accidentally standing in front of a sign in a way that it winds up saying, "I'm with stupid." Well, it's not quite that phrasing, it's something like that. And then, like, 3 years after that, Tony Abbott stood in front of a reject shop sign. It goes into other deeper issues as well. It's an incredibly funny and also incredibly heartbreaking show to watch.
Yeah.
Much more so, whereas, say, Yes, Minister, that is also a very poignant show, even to this day, but is still a bit more lighthearted, whereas The Thick of It does not pull its punches when it needs to. And In the Loop has most of the same actors, but they're playing different characters. So you get this interesting situation of, I guess this is an alternate universe continuity of The Thick of It, except Peter Capaldi as Malcolm Tucker, and I've forgotten the actor, but his protege Jamie, they are both called Malcolm Tucker and Jamie in both continuities, because those characters are eternal. As another note about the way that these works are all, and Veep as well, they're all scripted, but the script is, for the most part, bullet points for the plot elements of each scene. And most of the connective tissue is ad-libbed. I was kind of tempted to do this film with Ghostbusters 2016, as Ghostbusters 2016 is almost entirely ad-lib dialogue, but the editing is atrocious on it. So every scene just drags. Both films are very noisy and chatty, but in Ghostbusters it comes off as sloppy and inane, whereas in this it's the point. It's high energy because it's a high energy, tense, and all-consuming environment to be involved in politics. This film, for reference, does have elements of The Thick of It. In fact, it basically opens like an episode of The Thick of It, and is beginning with discussions about politics and the media. But it then is much more a film about how various levels of mid and upper level government, cabinet ministers, but not the actual head of state, and various stages of bureaucracy and media connections, the incredible sweeping impacts that they can have in the decisions that are ultimately made by those at the top. And so it is essentially a dramatization about the sort of circumstances that were probably instrumental in the declaration of the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. It's interesting that this was made shortly before the Royal Commission in the UK occurred into the circumstances that led to the start of the Iraq War, so this is being somewhat predictive. But yeah, essentially the point it's making is that a lot of the worst decisions in our political sphere are a product of people looking out for their own interests or just getting caught up in momentum of the circumstances that are around us. That our representative leaders are very much, very real, very flawed people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very flawed people.
Yeah. The first note I have here is high energy, which you've already talked about. This
it certainly started with a bang.
Yeah, and it just kept banging till the end.
It didn't stop, no.
Yeah, there was very few slow moments.
Yeah, I know that both of you do have a propensity to check out at points in movies, so I was worried that was going to happen. But
well, it didn't really...
It didn't let you? Didn't give you time?
I didn't feel I guess I did feel that a little with Watership Down, but this did not stop. Fantastically funny and witty and quick. I don't think there's a scene where there isn't some little quip or back and forth going on between at least 2 or 3 characters.
Sometimes at the same time.
Yeah. And I mean, it very early on we have the Malcolm Tucker and Toby getting into the elevator together, which I thought was a very cute.
Oh, that scene is brilliant.
It just, the whole movie is just like that. I don't know. It's hard to kind of. I can't gush. I can only gush so much.
And it's very difficult. There's a lot of incredibly funny lines in all of Iannucci's work, though a lot of it does wash over you, because the point is it's connective tissue to set the tone and the personalities of the characters.
Yeah.
Something that's cool about both this and In the Loop is there is a particular actor, I can't remember his name, but he's the bald guy. He's the British ambassador
to the UN.
in this, and I can't remember where he is in the Prime Minister's office in the thick of it, but he's basically the only character who doesn't swear,
Yes.
which provides this wonderful contrast. And it's touched on a little bit here, even more so with his character in the thick of it, is that he's just as corrupt as everyone else, but he exudes it in a completely different way.
Yeah. I think when I was thinking about what I was going to say about this film, I was a little bit worried just because even though the large majority of it is jokes and comedy, and that's like the thing that is you're most going to experience watching it, because as you say, it kind of washes over you. Like the things that I found most interesting were actually the moments where it would kind of show you just how serious the situation is.
Yeah, it knows how to hang back on the laughs just enough to let the actual core thematic content really sink in.
Yeah. I thought when we were first going through it, I thought maybe about halfway through I thought it was going to be more subtle with the seriousness, and I was pointing out there was like one scene with the general. Basically there's an American general played by Tony Soprano who and he's talking with another American. No, he's talking with this American lady. I just forgot what her actual job title is. That's actually hard to keep up with everyone's specific job title. They're all just kind of they all kind of have the same job.
There are people who are involved in the cabinet and important international departments.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what happens when you wind up in that political staff role.
What I kind of
is if you aren't like, say, Barnaby Joyce's lover who's getting paid because you are pregnant, then this is a thing that can happen. And I mean, that's essentially the joke that thingamabob that Yes Minister is built around, is the extremely ambiguous name that it gives its bureaucratic department. And that it's off like that. Have you ever seen Yes Minister?
Bits and pieces.
Yeah, the central conceit of that show is its jokes about bureaucracy operating as a self-serving institution.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas in this one, it's just like, this is just a product of constructing a system where you have representative leaders that need to enact the will of the people and operate in a legal manner.
Yeah.
People wind up in these jobs and get hired to help other people enact these jobs, and it gets messy, and personal goals and vendettas absolutely get in the way.
They're all self-serving, backstabbing dicks.
Yeah, so he's talking to one of the American politician ladies in that cabinet, and they're both looking for a way to stop the war. They're both in the anti-war camp. And
she plays the vice president in Veep.
Okay.
She's the main character of that.
Fair enough. And they, the comedy comes from the fact they have to hide out into a little girl's room.
Yes.
I believe.
That's right.
They're running some calculations on some learning numbers computer machine that's playing all these wacky cartoony noises. They're calculating the potential deaths of lives taken if they go boots on the ground in Iraq.
And that to me is like the first moment where it really, well, at least I think, it hits the audience exactly what they're talking about. Obviously, they say the words of what's going on, but that's like, to me, the first time when like an actual consequence is discussed.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like there's a war that's going to happen and a lot of people are going to die. And I really love that moment.
It's absurd.
Yes, and it's absurd. It might be my favorite scene in the whole movie. And there's a lot of great scenes in this movie. And at the time, that was like, as that was the first one, I wasn't sure if they were going to do any more of that. Eventually they did, and as the movie went on further and further, you could see just the...
As it gets towards the crux, because a lot of it's just building to where is it going, and of course, where it goes is basically the evidence that is assembled to declare war is fabricated.
Yeah.
And even horrifyingly inhuman people like Malcolm Tucker have these moments. They're very brief.
Yeah.
But the framing just enough to let you know that he's realizing what he is doing, that he is committing crimes against humanity.
Yeah. And that's, to me, that's the part of the film that I was really the most interested in. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in politics or any kind of history, but it was like, so it's kind of hard to talk about exactly because, I don't have specific information, but, it's pretty well known at this point that the war in Iraq was not the most.
Interventionist policies are very difficult to implement.
Yeah.
And it was not the best implementation,
No.
shall we say. Fog of War is a bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fog of war from a plane, and the mountain is unforeseeable until it's not, and it's very quick.
Oh man, yeah,
And then
those
it's
early
inevitable.
scenes, those are so
When
thick
we,
of it.
When we walk the trail of peace, sometimes we have to climb the mountain,
of
of
conflict.
Yeah, it's like this is really funny. Like that's really.
It
funny
is
stuff.
incredibly funny and absurd. But
Yeah, and then
this is
it just
used.
hits you. Yeah.
Yeah, what I liked is that it never undermined it though. Like it never really like the comedy never undermined the kind of
It highlighted
actual
it
gravity
rather
of
than
what
Yeah,
it was.
it knows when you need to be laughing with the characters, when you need to be laughing at the characters, and when you need to be laughing bitterly because it's the only way that you can cope
Yeah.
with the horrors that can be committed when you're in power.
I think the line in that scene specifically was, that's 12,000 troops who are going to die because we need to have some people left over, otherwise it looks like we've lost.
Yeah. It's like a black it's not like most black comedies that I've seen before, but I'd still probably put it in that area. It's like a stealth black comedy. Like you could watch this film and try not to think too hard about what's going on. You'd probably just enjoy it. As a
Enjoy
regular
the
comedy.
swears.
Yeah, enjoy the swears.
There's some very good swearies.
Yeah.
Or just the scenes with the wall.
Oh my god.
Where one of our lead characters, because this really is an ensemble film, and I guess the closest to an audience protagonist is one of the worst people in the film.
Yeah,
and
he's
utterly
genuinely
selfish and petty.
I hate Toby so much. I hate him more than I hate Linton, who's like
The man
head
who
American.
pushes for the war.
Yes, like he's somehow worse than the worst kind of villains that I've seen. There's just something about him that you hate him. You hate everything about him.
Oh, there. Can you please keep talking for a sec, Matt? I'll fix this in post.
Oh yeah, sure. And yeah, I just absolutely hate Toby. Just so goddamn.
Now, let me just... Words. Okay, yeah, good.
Yeah.
I just muted Louis' microphone while he steps away for a sec.
Yeah, sure. He just hated Toby as well so much that he just had to leave the room. He's not like he commits well.
He's on his second day in a new job, and the first thing he does is have an affair.
Yeah. I think that's the weird thing about him is that he like at first it seems that he just is really self-serving and is just really wants to keep his job and he has a sense of apathy. But then there are times when he does something that is really just like really poor behavior, like sleeping with having an affair, but then there'll be also these other moments where he'll just say something really snide.
Utterly snide and insensitive.
Yeah.
And like he thinks that he's above this even though he's the cause of a problem.
Yeah.
And then his attempts at being snide are so pathetic. In a film where Peter Capaldi can scream about horse penises all day and it's amazingly harsh, Toby's best lines is things like, well, it's not easy peasy lemon squeezy, it's difficult,
lemon
difficult.
And he'll just say really nasty things to people just out of nowhere where you'll realize that he's not just a character who's making mistakes in a tense situation or a stressful...
He's genuinely incompetent and genuinely gutless.
Yeah. I don't think...
Even when he tries to do the right thing, he goes about it in the most cowardly, gutless way.
Yeah.
Every time... This is Toby, right?
Yes.
Every time someone suggests that maybe Judy is the one who did something wrong, and his immediate reaction is, oh yeah, that would make sense.
Oh, yeah, just trying to bury his co-workers so he can have a better advantage.
Yeah. It's sometimes with characters like Toby, you get the idea that if things were not hectic or bad, like if everything was just nice and calm, that they would be okay people to interact with. But with this Toby, he is so bad that I feel like I just would not want to spend time with him, even under the best of circumstances.
When you work oftentimes in workplaces there will be a Toby.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do
I
not
think
want to meet Toby.
my favorite example in fiction besides this guy is probably Taro in the show White Box, a Japanese animated series from a few years ago about a Japanese animation studio. And it's about the production assistant role mostly and the stresses that are involved in actually getting animation finished at all. And there is a guy on the team there who's Toby. And you just want to punch him every episode. The show is somewhat autobiographical about the director's career history, and he was writing that character to discuss himself as his attitude when he entered the... Because the guy was saying, yeah, I was Toby when I started my career.
Yeah, he's awful. He's really awful. I think it was Louis that mentioned the wall subplot. And
It was me.
Oh, it was you? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
That
I'm
was
sorry.
yeah.
But I really want to talk about that because I'm not sure if my opinions on that would be what other people say. Because I feel like the movie kind of frames it as just a way of getting rid of the minister, of like this thing that doesn't really matter, but they're able to use it against him when basically the minister, I believe he's just a minister, he wants to resign
Yes.
in the face of he kind of goes he's on the fence about it for a lot of the film, and he actually does decide to do the right thing, which makes him very unique.
Yeah, he's one of the few people, he ultimately comes down on the side of right.
Yeah.
But he's so tone deaf to how that you achieve things in a political system
Yeah.
that it's too little, way too late.
Yeah. But even poorly thought out good intentions are rare in this film. So
Yes.
he still counts technically as a more heroic character. But either way, it doesn't matter because they, instead of him resigning, he's sacked over this.
Yeah, a relatively minor
Yeah.
controversy.
But to me, I kind of thought one of the things that went through my mind with that wall situation. Basically, I guess it's a wall that's part of their governmental building.
yeah, it's a wall on the edge of his MP's office in his constituency
Yeah.
that happens to be lined up with a neighbour's wall,
Yes,
and
just
it's
a
starting to
regular
fall
neighbour.
apart.
Yeah.
And so the people living in that house want it fixed because it's dangerous.
Yeah, and that's to me because it's treated as such like a non-trivial issue. I actually kind of felt that I wasn't sure if the movie was trying to do this or it was just me, but to me it showed, it was an issue.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
Oh no, the film's absolutely treating us. This is an issue, and this is an absolute failure on Simon's part. Because remember, it's not just that this is something brought up in phone calls.
Yeah.
He actually spends some time in his constituency office,
Yeah.
listening to the people that you can often ignore if you're on the front bench or the cabinet. And he's there listening to their problems, and he's hearing their problems, but he is ignoring them utterly.
Yeah.
He is fobbing off to anyone else that he can find. He has no interest in assuaging even the simplest of concerns, which are really simple problems to fix.
Yeah. And they are problems, and it's not the kind of film that would have the actual wall collapse on that old lady in some kind of like hackneyed kind of way, but the fact that it could happen and they don't
Well, it does
care.
start to collapse,
Yeah.
but it doesn't land on her.
He doesn't
'Cause
land on her. No,
It's
I mean-
even explicitly said that it's not in a dangerous location. The point isn't the potential damage here. The point is that you don't care enough to fix it.
Yeah. And it's not just him that doesn't care. Like, no one cares about this thing. And it's like, you've been appointed, like, your job is to help your constituents. Your job is to help solve these problems. And
Your
these
point
people
is
just
to
do not
represent
care.
the people who have elected you.
Yeah. And so even though it's, like, mostly a small thing, and in the end, ultimately used just as a way of it damaging the minister and stopping his attempt, pretty feeble, but still an attempt at self-sacrifice. And I think there's probably, now that I'm thinking about it, there's probably like a good piece of like theming there. Like, he didn't care about doing the right thing when
On
it
the
counted,
smaller scale.
On the smaller scale, when he probably could have done at least something about that.
Yeah, so how much harder is it going to be to do the right thing when it really matters?
Yeah, and it's used against him. And even though, and this is another like the tragedy of it all, in that you're happy that he fails, but him failing means that worse people succeed. And like it's such a tragic movie, really, and it's a very sad.
It's a very deep, biting, bleak outlook on politics, which is consistent with the bulk of Iannucci's work.
Yeah.
He wound up getting an honorary PhD in political science after the 4th series of The Thick of It from memory.
Yeah.
And like, there's some episodes of like this show does at least end with a somewhat biting tone, where pretty much the last thing that happens is he gets a phone call complaining about a septic tank, which was mentioned earlier, and then you see Toby getting booted out of his job already.
Yeah.
Because he's a horrible, horrible person.
Yeah.
And a lot of the episodes of The Thick of It will end quite humorously as well. One that always stuck out to me is the last episode of the 1st series, which is all about the super schools concept, which was a thing at the time, where the idea was to shut down as many regional schools as you can and just have large singular locations of schools and have like 40 to 50 to 60 students in each class.
Yeah.
And just like mass production education that way. And the main character, who's just an MP in that show, he's vehemently against it. But the episode's all about being forced to toe the party line, which is like, this has to be implemented. And so he attempts to find some ways to weasel around problems, and it leads to some misconstrued statements, and then him lying to a investigation committee, and snowballs in the usual comedic fashion. The ultimate kicker of the episode is that he does get pushed to toe the party line, and to do so he gives this incredibly heartfelt, teary speech about a friend of his who's got a disabled child. And the kicker is, this speech was brought up earlier in the episode in the anecdotes he uses as arguments against super schools, and he's forced to use them as an argument for.
Oh, man.
And immediately after it's done, like, Malcolm Tucker comes in and congratulates him on a job well done for getting it all cleared up. And the co-worker in his office, who was the source of this anecdote, just frowns and slams the door at him as the credits roll. And it's just like, this is a very serious issue that the writers and crew clearly felt passionately about. And so just, we're not ending this one on a joke.
Yeah, it has... What am I trying to say here? There's no redeeming factor here. It's only a bad thing happened, and some people got it, some people lost their job, but none of them... And you're kind of happy that they did, because they're either not very good people, or just not very effective people.
It's a few less bad eggs in the system.
Yeah, which ultimately mean nothing. So it's it's a very bleak film.
Yeah, and that's ultimately one of the things, is that it's a story about people in a system, but it is also very much a story about the system. And how there are systemic issues with the way that we process politics and discussion around them that facilitates bad situations continuing to happen.
I guess probably the only thing I would say in the negative category is I probably would say the romance plot probably wasn't that necessary.
No.
I didn't really see... Like, it just... Like, Toby was enough of an asshole that I don't think him sleeping with... having an affair really affected things either way.
It was entirely just to illustrate how pathetic Toby is.
Sure, but I didn't need that. Like, I feel like you still would have seen him being pathetic, and you still would have seen him being an asshole even without it. And it just
I think it's just one more layer, and it's as much for his actual girlfriend. She gets much less screen time than a lot of other characters in the film.
Sure.
And so I think it helps a lot for the bits because she's on the receiving end of some of the worst moments in the process that results in the documentation getting forged.
Yeah.
And so I think having those little touches as much for sympathizing with her as she goes through some of the roughest parts is useful.
Sure. Yeah, with Jamie flipping out.
Oh, Jamie. You kill that fax machine, Jamie.
No, I was going to say is like, my only counter to that is really that it comes down to like one of the best lines in the movie where it's like, I thought in the heat of the moment I was doing something to stop the war.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Oh my goodness me, Toby. I was having an affair. It was totally to try and stop the war happening, honest. And no one buys it at all. Just no.
Oh, it's just so absurd.
Oh yeah, everyone laughs at him.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say a bit before about what you were talking about with how ultimately the movie kind of feels like this, you know, it's a very sad thing. And how it's kind of like, I felt it was really well kind of like pointed out with like, what was the girl's name who wrote the paper?
Liz.
So like she did the right thing and wrote this fantastic paper outlining why the war is a terrible idea, and there are so many and yet she spends the entire movie worried about it. She spends the whole movie
and getting ribbed in the office that it's going to kill her career.
Destroy my career. Doing the right thing is going to destroy my career. Yeah. I was just like that. I loved that kind of like.
Yeah. And that's the thing which has consistently happened in politics.
Yeah.
Like, certainly as Australians, we are quite proud of the fact that we have a widespread firearms ban and very heavy restrictions on the acquisition and use of firearms. Many people had to resign to get that done.
Yeah.
Many people, it was a situation where people chose the right thing. And it's certainly amazing that Howard was able to get through that period as well, relatively unscathed. But like many people, particularly in the New South Wales Liberal Party, wound up resigning over that in order to get it accomplished. And like that's a rare case of the right thing being done and people being willing to have that integrity.
Yeah.
On a slightly less political note, as far as content of this film, one of the things that I was thinking about with going way back to notions of British stiff upper lip is that we've been talking about what gutless people and the like Toby are, but their emotional state is very, very neutral throughout the film. Because they're British, and that's just what you do, and yet you can still glean quite a wide array of emotions through characters, even when they're trying to maintain that stiff upper lip. And it's also so wonderfully contrasted by Malcolm Tucker and Jamie. There's just these great balls of furious Scotsmanship. And, like, this is very clearly a part of at least Malcolm's identity. Also Jamie, I've forgotten the exact specifics of his opening introduction, but he's basically, hey, I'm Scottish and angry too.
Yeah.
And, like, Malcolm Tucker obviously spends so much of it so desperate to prove that he's the tough man. And he's the big guy, and ultimately he's the people who thwart him are Tony Soprano, who's reasonably calm, and, in perhaps the greatest irony, the gay American senator. And there's some lines which confirm that, yeah, he's gay, and it's very, very soft gay coding, which is quite nice. But yeah, it's there. You can tell that this guy's gay, and that he utterly destroys Malcolm Tucker. Malcolm Tucker gets the last lines in, but he does everything that this guy wants.
Yeah.
And this nice little contrast of this blustering, desperate, masculine war cries going on by Malcolm, and that he's ultimately just as powerless as everyone else who's being stoic.
Yeah, I was saying this after the movie when there's a lot of threats of violence in this film.
Oh, yes.
All made by people who can't do any violence.
Can't actually enact violence.
It's why I think there's a scene where Malcolm's protege, Jamie, is like actually doing physical violence, and it's
to a fax machine.
To a fax machine, but he's also being very aggressive physically towards an old man and a lady, and it's like a real like
it's really confronting.
Yeah.
Because so much of the film has just been people just with that furious bluster.
Yeah.
And here is a case of no. Physical intimidation is a thing that happens, that has very real impacts on people in the heat of the moment. And that if it's the wrong people at the wrong time, it can have some very, very serious effects to have that cultural mindset that this is an okay tactic to use.
Yeah. And it's, someone like a Jamie is someone that in a better, more ideal situation you would keep an eye on, and you'd be like, yeah, we cannot give this guy any kind of power at all. He's like, Jamie's the kind of character that if like the British government turned into like something from The Watchmen out of nowhere, he would be perfectly fine. He'd probably be better off than where he is now. Like he would just be that strong guy that that strong arms people even like I feel like he's the Gestapo right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
He is exactly the sort of guy that you would want in your SS.
Yes.
That's a good note to end on. Any other comments that you like about what we've seen today?
Well, I rated Watership down as
a thumbs down.
Yeah.
And this is definitely a thumbs up. This is definitely worth a watch.
Absolutely, yeah.
For any reason that you might want to watch it, you should watch
If you
it.
want to laugh, if you want to cry, if you want to be confronted, if you want something to think about, this is a very, very good film.
Yes.
A wonderful experience.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
He did not say unforeseeable. You may have heard him say that, but he did not say that, and that is a fact. Okay, go ahead and print unforeseeable. Listen, see when I tell your wife about you and Angela Heaney at the Blackpool conference, what would be best? An email, a phone call, or what? Hey, I could write it on a cake with those little silver balls. Your hack husband betrayed you on October the 4th, and congratulations on the new baby. Yeah, maybe it's better to spike it, yeah. Okay, fuckety bye.